João, you are
Coloquei, acabei de colocar.
live transmission to YouTube. Thank you so much. So again, welcome everybody to our second day of our seminar, Semiotics of Unpredictability, International Seminar to celebrate Juri Lotman Centennial. I'm Douglas Galan, member of the Semiotic Space of Audiovisual Culture Research Group from the University of São Paulo. I will be the host of this session called Dialogues and Affinities of Lotman's Thought. In this panel, we will have the lectures from Brian James Baer, Winfried No, Sylvia Barei, and Paolo Demuru. It's an honor to have the acceptance of you, important scholars who have spread knowledge about semiotics through the world. Just for the organization of the panel, according to our program, we are planning a dynamic of 40 minutes maximum for all guests to do their lectures. And after this, at the end of the sections, we will have 30 minutes to have a conversation between our guests or our online audience. So if anybody has any questions during the lecture, the person can write in the chat, and in the end of the section, I will ask the question for the speaker, okay? So let's start our session. Our first guest is Brian James Baer, professor of Russian and Translation Studies at Kent State University. Professor Baer is the translator of the English version of the book, The Unpredictable Workings of Culture by Juri Lotman. That is an important work to our seminar. And Professor Baer will be lecturing Lotman and Eisenstein, Signs of Intellectual Kinship. Please, Mr. Baer, welcome, and feel free to start your lecture by now.
Thank you. I'll share my screen. Oh, let's see. All right. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this celebration of the work of Juri Mikhailovich Lotman. Thank you to the conference organizers. Of course, it would be wonderful to be there in Brazil, but I'm very happy that we can meet virtually. I should say that translating the work of Lotman has been one of the great intellectual privileges of my life. It's interesting for me as someone who teaches translation to engage with Lotman's thoughts about cultural translation while translating his works. I was also very blessed to have two wonderful editors on each of the projects I worked on, Yuri Pilshikov for The Unpredictable Workings of Culture and Marek Tam for the collection of essays by Lotman on cultural memory. In each case, the translation became a very productive dialogue about Lotman's work and about how to render that in English. So really rich experiences, and I think demonstrated to me how productive translation can be, not simply as an addendum, but as part of the processing of someone's thoughts. As I translated, I thought very often of Gayatri Spivak's famous statement that translation is the most intimate act of reading. And so it was really, I was struck by how wonderful it was to be in such close proximity to the mind of Lotman as I traced the progression of his thought. So today I'm going to talk about two Soviet thinkers, if you will, and their intellectual kinship. I think it's somewhat surprising that no comprehensive comparative study of the Soviet film director Sergei Eisenstein and the Soviet semiotician Juri Lotman exists, as they had so many things in common. Most obvious, of course, is their shared interest in cinema. One of Lotman's most important early works was his Semiótica kino, in which Eisenstein is one of the most cited directors. Moreover, as Herbert Eagle notes, the notion of a bipolar symmetry of codes as the crucial semiotic mechanism in art and culture emerged most clearly in Lotman's work on cinema. And Eagle goes on to argue that Lotman's analysis of cinematic montage is, in fact, an elaboration of Eisenstein's notion of collision montage. I should note here that when Lotman was writing Semiotica kino, he did not have access to many of the memoiristic writings of Eisenstein, which were collected and published only in 1997. In those writings, Eisenstein displays an approach to language and semiosis, which I think could be described as post-structuralist avant la lettre. And it is those memoiristic writings that I will be citing today. So in addition to cinema, viewed by both men as a dynamic site of intersemiotic translation, Eisenstein and Lotman shared other interests. Both had a deep and abiding fascination with the 19th century Russian poet Alexander Pushkin. Lotman, of course, wrote a major biography of the poet, and at his death, Eisenstein was planning a film on the poet's life. On a more general level, however, both men staked out positions in their intellectual and creative life, which could be described by Bakhtin's concept of vnia. That is, a position of outside, but within the Soviet system itself. That is symbolized for Lotman by the city of Tartu, which is situated on the geographic and cultural periphery of the Soviet Empire. Those liminal spaces of vnia, the anthropologist Alexei Yurchak argues, resulted in an internal displacement or unmooring of Soviet culture, which led to the sudden and surprising collapse of the Soviet Empire. Surprising, unexpected in Yurchak's formulation, because those sites of vnia had been so ignored in Cold War historiography, which was built on the dichotomies of, as Yurchak puts it, opposition and resistance, repression and freedom, the state and the people, official economy and second economy, official culture and counterculture, totalitarian language and counter language, public self and private self, truth and lie, reality and dissimulation, morality and corruption, and so on. But to understand the intellectual positioning of both Lotman and Eisenstein as vnia, I would argue we must set it against the semiotics of Soviet official culture, which, especially under Stalin, aspired to monoglossia, right, a single party line, and monosemy, or the avoidance of semiotic ambiguity. It was also fundamentally developmental and teleological. Eisenstein's and Lotman's both Eisenstein and Lotman conceived of culture in ways that were profoundly at odds with that official vision. Both men saw polyglossia and polysemy as central to the workings of culture and the human mind. In other words, not aberrations, but actually essential to the essence of culture. That, in addition to their fascination with quote unquote timeless cultural symbols and the essential unpredictability of cultural semiosis, undermined the very possibility of a teleological reading of history. So I want to explore the commonalities in their thoughts and specifically in their notions of semiosis in 4 sections. First, polyglossia, or the productive value of non-equivalence. Second, polysemy, or the endless dispersal of meaning. Part 3, cultural symbology, or the eternal return. And part 4, liminality, or the vnia of the semiosphere. So first, in terms of polyglossia, or the productive value of non-equivalence, crucial here, of course, is Lotman's essay, The Phenomenon of Culture, in which he presents 2 basic models of cultural translation. He distinguishes between one model in which translation takes place between 2 equivalent codes. In such a model, a message translated into the other code can be back translated into the first code without loss or distortion of meaning. Loss or distortion only happens when there is a glitch in the technology of communication. In the second model, however, back translation of a translated message can never produce the original message intact. Right? In this model, in which translation takes place between non-equivalent codes, it is the only model that can generate new messages, making it, in Lotman's view, the very foundation of creative thought. And he goes on to associate it with the 2 asymmetrical hemispheres of the human brain. In this way, Lotman construes culture as a continuous process of translation, but as Alexei underscored in his talk, always with tension, because the codes are non-equivalent. And that is crucial, again, not an aberration, but central to the workings of culture. In this way, or as Halbert, so we see something similar to Lotman's model of culture as translation between non-equivalent codes in Eisenstein's theorization of the knot of culture, K-N-O-T, an image that he takes from Leonardo da Vinci, who was also fascinated by knots. The knot would in fact become central to Eisenstein's conceptualization of the artistic process. As he suggests at the very end of the autobiographical essay, The Author and His Theme. Quote, "We encounter a phenomenon, and the plan of this knot seems to be laid over this phenomenon. The features of one coincide or otherwise. They coincide partially, here and there. They do not coincide. They clash with one another, striving for coincidence, sometimes breaking the structure and the outlines of reality in order to satisfy the contour of individual desire, sometimes violating individualities in order to synchronize with the demands of what they have clashed with. I cannot actually remember any examples of the latter from my own personal practice, but then I could give plenty of examples illustrating the former." Note the stress here on non-equivalent, non-coincidence, what Lotman would call non-equivalence. In his memoiristic writing, Eisenstein often expresses a fascination with the generative force of intersemiotic translation, or translation between different media and between different levels of culture, for example, popular and high culture, which resists equivalence. This is not surprising, of course, for a film director who must tell stories through language, visual images, and music. But one especially notable passage occurs in his film on the life of the medieval Russian leader Dmitry Donskoy. Eisenstein turns to a pre-Soviet collection of obscene folk tales by Afanasyev, which he describes somewhat coyly as cherished and adult. There he finds a tale of a rabbit luring a young maiden through a split tree trunk, where she gets stuck, becoming then the victim of the rabbit's sexual advances. Eisenstein has a soldier recount the tale to Donskoy while sitting around a fire before the crucial battle. It will inspire Donskoy's military strategy. In this way, Eisenstein presents Donskoy's military genius as, in a sense, a capacity to translate between different modalities, the popular and the official, or the sacred and the profane. Of course, Donskoy is a saint of the Russian Orthodox Church. On a meta level, it represents Eisenstein's ability to translate between the traditional oral culture of the folk and the modern culture of cinema. Part 2, polysemy, or the endless dispersal of meaning. The associative, almost stream of consciousness that is dominant in Eisenstein's memoiristic writings challenges the logic of metonymy put forward in his official formulation of montage as pars pro toto, or part for whole, in which a part would stand in for the whole. According to that formulation, the toto in the montage would refer to the overall theme or even the ideological message. In Eisenstein's memoirs, however, the reigning principle, I would argue, is pars pro pars, or part for part, which generates random chains of signifiers that do not resolve into anything greater, enacting what Jacques Derrida would later describe with his concept of différance as the endless deferral of meaning in language. Consider, for example, Eisenstein's description of a striptease he witnessed while in the United States. Quote, a bow tie, a ribbon, the last shred of decency. The audience is in uproar, shouting, raving, but beneath the bow tie is a bow tie, beneath the ribbon, a ribbon, beneath the pearl. The spectacle vanishes into darkness. Meaning here in this mise en abîme never comes to a definitive rest. Metonymic associations in Eisenstein's semiotic world are often built on the arbitrariness of homophony, on phonic, visual, and graphic resemblance, in which one might say somatics trumps semantics and desire trumps reason. Such associations generated by the materiality or corporeality of words played a prominent role in avant-garde literary movements of the early 20th century, which celebrated the autonomous life of words once liberated from their subservience to semantic content or meaning. The Russian avant-garde poet Alexei Kruchonych expressed this in their concept of the word as such, slovo как таковое. The literary deployment of such associations reached its apotheosis, one could say, in James Joyce's masterpiece, the novel Ulysses, for which Eisenstein expresses enormous admiration in the memoir. Connecting language with the somatic realm through sight and sound was seen as a way to escape the rational realm of verbal semantics in order to gain access to the irrational or pre-rational, described by the Russian futurists as zaum, or beyond reason, and to critique the supposed unity and stability of the bourgeois liberal subject. In fact, Eisenstein openly acknowledges his intellectual and artistic debt to the futurists, and specifically to their approach to language, in a short chapter titled Names. He writes somewhere, a very long time ago, the translator Kornei Chukovsky very wittily defended the futurists. He found the same abstract charm in their euphonious nonsense as we find in Longfellow's enumeration of Indian tribes. For us, they too are utterly devoid of any sense, and their charm lies solely in the rhythm and phonetic features. In Hiawatha, came Comanches, and so on. Sometimes when I start remembering things, I lapse into an utterly abstract chain of names and surnames. Eisenstein's memoirs are in fact filled with chance encounters and random associations, which, as he explains in the chapter 3 Letters About Color, is central to his creative process. As he writes, quote, "Another motive prompted me from behind the scenes, which was to give myself free rein and throw out onto the page the whole gamut of associations which spill out uncontrollably at the least provocation, and sometimes apropos nothing of all. Some of these random associations are quite frivolous, even absurdist, as when he connects Valerian Dovgalevsky, the plenipotentiary representative of the Soviet Union in France, the English writer Rudyard Kipling, and the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche through their distinctive mustaches. Or later, Marx, Tolstoy, and the Austrian politician Engelbert Dollfuss through their height. But perhaps the most extreme manifestation of this occurs in plays on words based solely on phonic or graphic resemblance, as elaborated in the following passage. This is Eisenstein writing. He's talking about his trip to Montmartre in Paris. The high priest of bars like Le Chat Noir and Au Lopin Agile. This second Montmartre bar was a play on words in honor of the artist who painted the sign, Lapin Agile, so painted by Agile. Just think of Hugo's Le Pot aux Roses, the pot of roses, which became Le Pot aux Roses, the rose thorn, or his Tu auras, Latin for you pray, which became Trou au rat, rat hole, which was where Esmeralda found sanctuary when she fell into the hands of the mad old woman. Or again, that Catholic and reactionary King Charles X, Le Pieux Monarque, the pious monarch whom Travis turned into Le Pieux Monarque, or the blockhead monarch. This is a situation in which two meanings exist side by side in a state of often parodic or ironic co-presence. It is a celebration of polysemy. This idea lurking behind sameness is expanded by Eisenstein to include repetition, which he argues inevitably produces new interpretation. So repetition is never the same. Quote, all the rules governing refrains dictate that there must be a new light cast on the subsequent repetition. It must be interpreted differently. He develops this notion further in relation to the image of the mirror in decadent art, in which the reflection takes on a life of its own, as in Hans-Heinz Ewer's and Paul Wegener's art film of 1913, Student of Prague, or in Oscar Wilde's poem, The Disciple. He notes elsewhere that Beardsley's illustrations for Wilde's Salome may be subjected to a completely different interpretation as parody, once read after one has read of the hatred the two men felt for one another. So Lotman too was fascinated by plays on words as culturally productive phenomena, sites of semiotic reorganization, or one could say resemanticization. Consider this, excuse me for quoting this long passage, but it's a great example of Lotman's fascination with plays on words. I would also note these are horribly difficult to translate, as I think you'll see. This passage comes from his essay, The Dynamics of Culture. The duel is a specific semiotic structure that intersects with various other mechanisms. Even its relationship to the physical act of fighting is not so simple. The famous duelist, Count Fyodor Tolstoy, known as the American, played with the relationship between dueling and the physical leveling of the arm, as witnessed by the poet Vyazemsky. Quote, the prince owed Tolstoy a rather large sum of money on a promissory note. The term of the loan had run out long ago, and several extensions had been issued, but the prince wasn't paying the money back. Finally, having lost all patience, Tolstoy wrote to him, if you do not pay back the loan in its entirety by such and such a date, I will not go looking for justice in the courts, but will direct myself directly to your excellency's лицо. The word лицо in Russian is polysemous. It can mean one's physical face, but in administrative language, it can mean an official, and in legal language, it is often translated as an entity. Here we have a many-layered play on words. To direct oneself to a лицо is a bureaucratic expression meaning to file a complaint directly with an official. At the same time, for Tolstoy, it was meant as a relatively serious insult, accompanied by a challenge to a duel. A slap in the face as a sign of insult was, as a rule, replaced in actual practice with the sign of a slap, expressed with a threatening gesture, such as the throwing down of a glove or a verbal insult. Tolstoy, the American, however, was also threatening the offender with something else, namely that he would exit the sphere of semiotics for the realm of the practical and simply sock him in the mug, morda. The expression to sock someone in the mug was a ritualized rejection of ritual. It is no coincidence that the master in Bulgakov's Master and Margarita, from the non-ritualized perspective of a lunatic, demands immediately to know whether his offender has a face, лицо, or a mug, morda. To sock someone in the mug and to give someone a slap on the face are in the language of behavior, not synonyms, but antonyms. In this way, Tolstoy's play on words is in threatening to address himself directly to the лицо, belongs simultaneously to bureaucratic language, to the language of gesture, and to non-ritualized practice. Part 3, cultural symbology or the eternal return. So both Lotman and Eisenstein express deep interest in the timeless cultural symbols and their citation or recitation and resemanticization in contemporary context. While Eisenstein's understanding of the role of cultural symbols was informed by his deep interest in psychoanalysis, and for him, libidinal drives are what are behind cultural semiosis in many cases. In fact, in his memoirs, he cites all the major psychoanalytical thinkers of his time, such as Sigmund Freud, Sandor Ferenczi, Carl Jung, Otto Rank, Hans Sacher, Marie Bonaparte, Isidor Sadger, and Alexander Luria, as well as the sexologists, Richard von Krafft-Ebing and Magnus Hirschfeld, as well as the philosopher Otto Weiniger, whereas Lotman, for the most part, did not share this interest in psychoanalysis. That being said, Lotman's concept of a symbolic reservoir has some links to Jung's notion of a cultural unconscious. Moreover, both Eisenstein and Lotman were influenced by works that would today be described as key texts in cultural anthropology. Eisenstein was deeply influenced by Sir James Fraser's seminal study of mythology and religion, The Golden Bough, and Lotman by Victor Turner's studies of religious ritual and symbology. Certain aspects of their approaches to cultural symbols could be described as structuralist, insofar as they allow for substitutions, or what Eisenstein refers to as inversions based on structural parallels, or in Lotman's thinking, isomorphism. As he writes, isomorphism is a basic mathematical concept, but it is also one of the fundamental concepts of human culture in general. In part, it serves to define the relationship between man and deity. Man is in the likeness of God, and so at least to some degree can be equated with him. This similarity permits man ideally to raise himself to the level of God, while allowing God in the image of God-man to assume a human likeness. So you see the productive nature of this isomorphism, which allows it doesn't stabilize meaning. In fact, it allows for kind of shifts or replacements. And so while polysemy represents difference within sameness, we could say, symbols establish sameness between different things, as Lotman comments in his essay, The Dynamics of Culture. The Last Supper is not simply the foreshadowing of Christ's death. as a later consciousness will rationally interpret it. It is the same thing as the crucifixion, only in a different language. For the consciousness of later periods, the difficulty of understanding this type of substitution led to the emergence of plots that interpreted as a play on words what had initially been the signification of one and the same thing in different symbolic systems. Later rational thought is inclined to simplify this mythological unity. And so, for example, there is the well-known practice among the Romans of deceiving the gods. The divinity was promised a certain number of heads of cattle, but after the successful completion of the deal, the god was presented with the heads or pods of poppy flowers. Understanding this episode as wordplay and deception is, of course, a later interpretation of an earlier mythological union of semiotic sacrifice and commercial exchange of equal values. Here, the juridical thinking of the Romans translated mythology into its own language. And part 4, liminality, or the lvia of the semiosphere. The interest in rituals led the cultural anthropologist Victor Turner to develop the concept of liminality, which he understood as a transitional space between two different states, as in rites of passage. As Turner defines it, the attributes of liminality are necessarily ambiguous. Liminal entities are neither here nor there. They are betwixt and between the positions assigned and arrayed by law, customs, convention, and ceremonial. So they are both predicated on the ability, the polysemy of symbols, but are also, we might say, in ritual, they seek to contain that polysemy. Now, in Eisenstein's writings, liminality is expressed most fully in his concept of ecstasy, which he notes, quote, literally means stepping outside oneself. For Lotman, of course, such liminality is represented in its most extreme form in the concept of vzryv, or explosion. As he writes, the moment of explosion is situated at the intersection of the past and the future and appears as if out of time. It should be noted that Eisenstein too invokes the word explosion several times in the memoirs, noting, quote, an explosion in art, and particularly a pathetic emotional outburst, is constructed according to the very same formulae as a detonation of emotions, presaging Lotman's theorization of explosion as a cultural phenomenon. While there is undoubtedly a strong structuralist foundation in Eisenstein and Lotman's discussions of symbology, both men complicate these models in ways that could be described as post-structuralist avant la lettre, by recognizing the relative nature of perception itself. In other words, both men discuss liminality, but not just from the outside, namely its effects on objects observed. They contemplate liminality as an observational perspective as well. Moreover, they do so from a theoretical, both from a theoretical perspective and from a personal one. Lotman treats this issue in a more sustained theoretical manner than Eisenstein, noting in regard to moments of explosion, quote, the nature of the explosion changes according to the position of the observer describing it. This would become the basis for Lotman's critique of traditional historiography, which invariably presented the past in hindsight as a series of inevitable, casually linked events. And of course, this was one of the great contributions of unpredictability to historiography. How can we imagine a historiography that does not render history as an inevitable succession of causal links. On a more personal level, however, both men acknowledge that they are writing from a place of liminality. Eisenstein, for example, wrote the bulk of his memoirs between 1946, after suffering a massive heart attack, and his death in 1948, a period he describes himself in his memoirs as a PS, a postscript to his life. Lotman acknowledged the historical liminality of his position while writing the unpredictable workings of culture after the fall of the Soviet Union, when Russia's future appeared radically uncertain. As he notes at the very opening of Unpredictable Workings, there are periods when reflecting upon general ideas and the paths of human history become especially vital. These are critical periods when one has reached the end of old paths while the new paths have yet to be determined. These are periods of choice and freedom, and simultaneously of doubt and uncertainty. Lotman seemed at that moment someone hopeful that the fall of communism and the emergence of a civil society in post-Soviet Russia might spell the end of the traditional binary structure of Russian society discussed by Mikhail Mikhailovich yesterday. The events of today, of course, suggest that this did not occur. In any case, in the writings both of Lotman and Eisenstein, the author's recognition of their own liminality lends a particular pathos to their writings, one that distinguishes them from objective works of theory or history. And I will end there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
It was very intriguing. If you agree, we can move on to the next lecture. In the end of the 3 lectures of the day, we can do some questions. Unfortunately, I knew that Paolo can't stay with us today because he's sick right now, coming from hospital. So we unfortunately don't have the presence of Paolo today. Well, thank you, Baer. It's a pleasure to hear you. Very intriguing panel. And now we will give word to our next guest. That is Professor Winfried No. Professor No is linked of University of Kassel and professor from Pontifícia Universidade Católica PUC de São Paulo, from São Paulo in Brazil. His works on different theories of semiotics, especially in Peirce semiotics, are published all over the world. So it's a pleasure to have your acceptance, Professor No. And now Professor No will be lecturing Lotman and Peirce, some unexpected affinities. Well, you can start your lecture right now, if you want. If you want to share your screen, feel free.
First of all, I have to share my screen. This is the green arrow. No.
Yes, at this green button in the end of the screen.
The green one.
Where is this writing share screen?
Shared screen, let me see.
Ou compartilhar tela.
For the moment, I have not live transcript.
No.
Liberate. There's a green
Yes,
arrow,
put the green.
not the green one.
Not the green one. It's that button called
Yes.
chat.
For me, it's the
Chat.
green. Compartilhar a tela. Share screen.
Well, is
Yes.
am I here?
Yes.
Is this my presentation?
Well, then I'm happy to be with you, and thank you for the for the invitation, which is a continuation of earlier contributions to earlier meetings organized by Irene Machado with brilliance, like the present one. So I'm happy to be able to continue a series of contributions on the work of Lotman, which strengthen also my connections with Tartu semiotics, where I've been able to be several times in my career. Here on the screen, you see the title of my contribution, which has slightly changed in relation to the program. Lotman and Peirce, Contrasts and Some Unexpected Affinities. The word some indicates that my presentation is can only be a partial presentation, and I have decided to let you participate in the text itself that I have prepared. First of all, I would like to introduce my topics, which are divided into two, which is more Lotmanian than Peircean, because for Peirce I would need three. But as you see, the subtitles are three. The main division is between contrasts and the unexpected affinities. And the question that I will try to answer or leave open is whether the two leading figures of modern semiotics, Lotman and Peirce, are antipodes in global semiotics, or whether they have more in common than is usually thought. The subdivision of the two parts of my presentation is in the part on contrasts, on the differences between the general backgrounds and contexts, the differences in key concepts, and contrasts with a focus on the framework issues of this conference, which are unpredictability and explosion, although explosion is not on the title page of this conference. It has cropped up quite a lot. And then against the background of so many differences, the unexpected affinities, which concern Lotman's semiosphere in parallel with Peirce's universe perfused with signs, Lotman's concept of auto-communication in parallel with Peirce's inner dialogues, and 3, Lotman's text and Peirce's sign as agents in semiosis. Some of the ideas are published in the companion to Juri Lotman, which came out this year and to which several of the participants of this meeting have contributed. So my first topic is the general background. And this, these summaries are not very original because everybody, most people in semiotics are familiar with them. But before I speak on the unexpected affinities, I believe it is necessary and useful to point out what distinguishes the two founding figures of modern semiotics. Lotman's semiotics, as we all know, has its foundation in literary and cultural history, in information theory, and 20th century structuralism. Peirce's background is in phenomenology, logic, and the theory of evolution, as well as in the natural sciences, not in the humanities. Just a minute. And this brings me to some of the more specific key concepts and the contrast between the two approaches to semiotics. The first is the opposition between binary and triadic semiotics. As we know, Lotman's thought is fundamentally binary, which is very much in syntony with the binary structure of information theory, with which he was very familiar, whereas Peirce's thought is always founded on triads. Second, Lotman's focus is often on boundaries, oppositions, confrontations, and on disruptive processes, which he described by the metaphor of explosion. Peirce focuses more on the continuity between opposites and processes of mediation between them. And now I address a few concepts which Irene Machado had in her call for papers. One of them is otherness. If otherness for Lotman is associated with indeterminacy and untranslatability, as we can read in Irene's call for papers, for Peirce, otherness means a challenge for the semiotic self to recognize itself in the other. Consider also some of some other key concepts quoted by Irene in her call for papers. While for Lotman, technological progress is an agent of destabilization and irrationality is constitutive to the evolution of culture and the arts, for Peirce, technology is based on the principle of concrete reasonableness, which emphasizes what the evolution of nature and technology have in common, not what opposes them. Then I come to chaos and order, which are key concepts for both semioticians. Lotman confronts them as opposite poles within a semiosphere in which order is associated with stagnation and chaos, with the origins of creativity. Peirce, by contrast, describes chaos and the state in which the semiotic universe has, as the state in which the semiotic universe has its origin, and order as a goal towards which it evolves. Now I come to some contrasts related to the framework issues addressed by this conference. The difference between Lotman's and Peirce's fundamental semiotic assumptions are related to these framework themes. One is unpredictability. The key concept chosen for the framework of this conference, Semiótica, the Imprevisibilidade. Lotman, according to Irene's account in the introduction to this conference, understood unpredictability in the sense that human behavior is subject to irreversible processes and contributes to the emergence of unusual possibilities of meaning that ensure and preserve the dynamism of culture. Peirce's conception of unpredictability has two sides, one of which is in syntony with Lotman's thought, while the other contrasts with it. In the latter sense of a contrast with Lotman's key concept of unpredictability, Peirce questions the concept of unpredictability when he emphasizes those aspects of the future that are predictable and can even be anticipated in the present. The backdrop of this theory is Peirce's synergism, the theory of a continuity that reaches out to the future. Continuity, in this sense, even has effects on the present, insofar as human agency in the present is influenced by the future. In the sense that this is so, the future cannot be entirely unpredictable. It is also foreseeable as a reality that constantly influences and even determines human agency in the present. It seems that even Lotman had to recognize this reality of the future in the present when he declared in 1988, as Alexei told us yesterday, that the past never passes. Lotman's words, the past never passes, since if it never passes, it will be present in the future. And in this sense, this presence in the future is predicted. As an explicit syntony between Peirce's and Lotman's conception of unpredictability, on the other hand, we have Peirce's principle of thaikism, the doctrine that chance is operative in the semiosphere in a way that it is the source of all creative processes, not only in culture, but also in nature. After the conception of unpredictability as a motor of cultural evolution, the second Lotmanian key concept in the focus of this conference that contrasts with Peirce's semiotics in a way is explosion. Lotman's theory of culture as explosion, thus the title of his last but one book in English, was the topic of yesterday's round table on disruptive models of culture in processes of transformation. Insofar as explosion is conceived as evolutionary discontinuity, it may enter in conflict with Peirce's concept of synergism, the dogma of continuity as a principle of evolution. Explosion and revolution are evidently metaphors for various kinds of disruptive processes. While Lotman was more interested in the history of culture and the arts, Peirce had more interest in the evolution of science. But since science is included in culture, Lotman's metaphor of explosion is also applicable to the evolution of science. The conception that scientific evolution proceeds in disruptive processes was the much discussed thesis that Thomas Kuhn developed in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions of 1962, which Lotman discussed with sympathy in his paper of about 1989, first translated into Spanish by Desiderio Navarro under the title El progreso técnico como problema culturológico, in the first volume of his anthology Semiosfera. Semiosfera. The topic deserves a more detailed analysis, but in our context, it must suffice to point out one respect in which the theory of scientific evolution through revolution conflicts with Peirce's view on the same topic. The contrast follows as a consequence from Peirce's doctrine of continuity. In about 1902, Peirce wrote that, I quote, "Science does not advance by revolutions, warfare, and cataclysms, but by cooperation. for which, in parenthesis, I hope this conference in times of war is a good example. End of parenthesis. And I continue with Peirce, and by his joining his own world, by the scientists joining his own work in one continuous piece to that already done. Ideas on continuity. Notice that in the month of Bruno Latour's death, it is almost needless to say that this conception of scientific evolution is much more Latourian than Kuhnian. But after so many differences, but I have already pointed out a few affinities, my focus is now on these affinities. While the differences discussed so far may convey the impression that Lotman and Peirce are antipodes in the sphere of global semiotics, they nevertheless testify to the fact that both had a common interest in several key issues of semiotics in general. Moreover, the two authors are even surprisingly close in some of their basic tenets, of which only three can be introduced in the following. One, Lotman's theory of the semiosphere, his theory of auto-communication, and the concept of the autonomy of the sign, which is perhaps the most surprising of the three, or less known. The first is already has already been discovered by many others. The parallelism between Lotman's semiosphere and Peirce's universe perfused with signs. Four words which are a quote from Peirce's writings. For Lotman, communication presupposes a semiosphere outside of which there is no communication. Since immersion in a cultural semiosphere is the prerequisite of communication, and communication is not possible without its semiotic space, we are confronted with a paradox. All participants, says Lotman, in the communicative act must have some experience of communication, be familiar with semiosis before they can communicate. The semiotic space necessary for the existence and the functioning of languages has prior existence and is in constant interaction with languages. Disregarding the dualism between the inside and the outside of the semiosphere, Lotman's semiosphere has two parallels with the Peircean semiotic universe. One is Peirce's conception of the ubiquity of signs, epitomized in his dictum that I quote, the entire universe is perfused with signs if it is not composed exclusively of signs. The other is his postulate of collateral observation or experience as a prerequisite of the interpretability of a sign. I quote Peirce, by collateral observation, I mean previous acquaintance with what the sign denotes. And here we have the parallelism with Lotman's prerequisite of communication. In contrast to communication theorists who postulate that communication takes necessarily place between a sender and receiver, Lotman introduces the concept of auto-communication, which is our second topic in the confrontation and the parallels between Peirce and Lotman. Define auto-communication, defined by Lotman as the transmission of a message from a present I to a future I, who reinterprets the same message in a new context. The Peircean counterpart to this theory of the self in a permanent is his theory of the self in a permanent inner dialogue. Peirce's theory of auto-communication, which he does not call by this name, is encapsulated in his dictum that thinking always proceeds in the form of a dialogue between different phases of the ego, so that being dialogical is essentially composed of sides. And this brings me to my third and last parallelism between Lotman and Peirce, of which I believe is the one that has least been paid attention to so far. This affinity between Lotman and Peirce's semiotics concerns the concept of agency, of semiotic agency in the process of semiosis. For Lotman, the text is an agent in communication. For Peirce, it is the sign, not the text. But of course, for Peirce, the sign, the text is a sign. Peirce's concept of sign does not distinguish between sign and text, or it distinguishes between the two in a different way. So at any rate, there is no opposition between the sign and the text. The text is a sign. Lotman conceives the text as a meaning-generating mechanism. The text is a participant in communication with a life of its own. T1, the text, as conceived by the addresser, translates itself into T2, the text as interpreted by the addressee, and thus begins to act on its own. Neither is the text a mere product or intellectual property of an author, nor is it the product of a reader's mind. It is a true agent in communication who, I quote, can create its own audience, meaning, and reader. The text modifies the receiver. It does not only stem from the context, but also expands its context by changing it. The text is not just a sign that reminds us of the author's ideas. It has a memory of its own. The agency of the text consists in its capacity to evoke, I quote Lotman, external associations, quotes, reminiscences, allusions, hints, etc., and to bring fragments of other texts into the text, often not as deliberate, willful of the author. Seems to be missing a word here. According to Lotman, not the addresser aims at influencing the thought of the addressee, but the text itself. The text, I quote, strives to make its reader conform to itself, to force on them its own system of codes, and the readers respond to the in the same way. Notice that Lotman speaks of the text, not of the author of the text, who strives, let me repeat, to make its readers conform to it, to force on them its own code, system of codes, and the readers respond in the same way. The text, as it were, contains an image of its own ideal readership. Again, Lotman says, does not speak of the author, but of the text that contains this image of its own ideal readership. And the readership, one of its own text. Lotman's theory of the text as a generator of meaning is quite in accord with Charles Sanders Peirce's theory of the agency of the sign, with which Lotman was apparently unfamiliar. Peirce was perhaps still more radical in attributing life to science, but Lotman undoubtedly also considered the text as an agent in semiosis and communication. While Peirce wrote, "Every symbol is a living thing in a very strict sense that is no mere figure of speech. The body of the symbol changes slowly, but its meaning inevitably grows, incorporates new elements, and throws off old ones." Lotman's version of the life of the text is the following. And with this quote, I end my lecture and leave the conclusions to my audience. I quote Lotman, "For a text like a grain of wheat, which contains within itself the program of its future development, is not something given once and all and never changing. The inner and yet as yet unfinalized determinacy of its structure provides a reservoir of dynamics when influenced by contacts with new contexts. One might expect a text as it lives through the centuries to become faded and to lose the information contained in it. Yet, texts that preserve their cultural activity reveal a capacity to accumulate information that is the capacity for memory. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Nutt. Thank you. If everybody's agree, we can move to the next panel, the next lecture without a break. What do you mean, Danny? Let's go.
I have to get out of the shared screen, right?
Yes, just press. Okay. You finished your share.
Sorry,
for...
my microphone was closed. I don't know, because yesterday we make a break after the two. So I think we can, because I don't know if Paolo is not coming. I don't have the last, but I think that we can, maybe I can present my conference. I don't know, because on Friday we have 6. So I think that's best to have a break to talk about. Okay.
The two first break with
after the debate of this.
Okay.
Like yesterday.
Okay, so
but then we have only one speaker.
Maybe one.
Because yesterday you had 2 speakers after the break, right?
Yes. Right. Yes, but I prefer to talk to Douglas, or to think about the possibility of my presentation today.
If you agree, we do this. We can do the conversation, the debate about the first 2 lectures now. After, we can do a break of 10 minutes. And after this, we can make the lecture from Sylvia, and from Irene, maybe if Irene can or could. Do you agree, Professor Baer? Brian, do you agree to the discussion, the debate for your lecture right now? That's okay. Brian is here. I didn't see. I don't see.
I think that is
here. Brian, are you stay with us? Your mic and your camera is turned off.
Can I ask to Winfried?
Of course. If Winfried agree.
Yes, of course. Why should I not?
Okay.
Thank
so
you.
We can start the debate with the questions for the Winfried, and after to the Brian, maybe.
I thank you for your lecture. I think that I was very. It's your comparison with Lotman and Peirce. I think that is very interesting for me. But I'd like to ask now. I would like to understand how we can comprehend, for example, the new information in the sense of Lotman's achievements, with if the future can be predictable. That's my question. I can't imagine which kind of new information we are talking about, because if it is predictable, which kind of new information we can understand, please?
I believe your question concerns the first part of my lecture, not the final part, where we are also confronted with the future, because Lotman says that the texts remain active in the future. But let me explain what Peirce means about the presence of the future in the present time, now, in other words. It is very simple. Life is a continuous process, and life would not be possible if we did not have plans for the future. And if we were not influenced by the future in our present actions. So in this sense, in the sense in which we anticipate the future and organize our present actions with respect to tomorrow, next year, the end of our course, etc., we would not have continuity in our lives. And in this sense, the future is not unpredictable. And Lotman says so himself when he says that history continues to be present. He says that if history is present tomorrow, we have a continuity of history in the future. And so the future is not entirely unpredictable. Nobody says that the future is entirely unpredictable. But in many respects, it is predictable, and Lotman's emphasis on the unpredictability is, in my view, a rhetorical emphasis on this aspect of the future, because his conception of history contradicts this idea of unpredictability.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. It's difficult to understand every detail of this complex thinking, but I have to understand better. Peirce, thank you.
Well, if everybody's agree, we can move to another questions to Professor Winfried, and after Pampa is have a question to Professor Neff, probably.
No, lo que yo quería preguntarle, conversar con Irene acerca de si en realidad esto de ser previsible o no previsible el futuro no tiene que ver con la idea de una tercera opción, es decir, ese tertium non datur que Lotman, digamos, propone sobre todo en cultura y explosión, en el sentido de que al ver binariamente cuáles son las opciones, puede, o supongo yo, no sé si estoy muy errada, pensar en una posibilidad para pensar esto imprevisible, que acostumbrados a una lógica binaria, no lo pensamos como posibilidad de futuro. Digamos, en ese sentido, sería, digamos, lo impredecible, un cierto modo colectivo de no estar preparado para ciertas terceras opciones que no las podemos ver sencillamente porque nuestros binarismos culturales nos impiden esa proyección. Es decir, se trataría, pienso yo, no sé, por ahí estoy inventando, pero de una, no de ponerlo en términos de si el futuro es predecible o no predecible en términos de ese absoluto, sino en qué medida un colectivo puede prever en función de poder examinar opciones que no son las que se están manejando como las únicas posibles. Digo, ¿no? Porque esto de alguna manera está un poco vinculado a también eso que ayer se discutió tanto acerca de la mirada sobre la causalidad en la historia, en la interpretación de la historia. Es decir, dar por hecho o por sentado una causalidad en un proceso histórico, como hacen los historiadores, sin pensar que en realidad se ha, digamos, producido el encuentro con una de las opciones que en el momento en que, supongamos, Napoleón iba a dar su batalla, se abría como un abanico. En ese sentido, lo pienso yo, un poco relativísticamente, ¿no? Tal vez, por eso le pregunto a Irene, ya que ella está interesada en ese tema y yo por mi tema de la literatura de anticipación también me interesa.
Bom, não sei se você prefere se eu respondo em
Oh,
português.
encantada, profesor, es que como yo no manejo bien el inglés, no me atreví a preguntarle.
Então, eu vou tentar responder em português. Eu acho que você mesmo deu as respostas por suas palavras-chave. Uma é o tema da antecipação. A antecipação é um muito bom exemplo de que o dogma da imprevisibilidade não pode ser tomado no sentido absoluto. E o outro é a ideia do tertium non datur. O terceiro, isso é bem peirciano, mas Lotman também, como você mostrou, com a sua referência a sua obra sobre cultura e como explosão, também conhecia essa necessidade de superar os dualismos.
Así es.
E o presente e o futuro muitas vezes é tratado como um dualismo, mas a teoria da antecipação, que é bastante ativa como campo de pesquisa atualmente, é um ótimo exemplo da não da previsibilidade absoluta, mas de uma outra forma de previsão.
Así es. Eso
Uma
es lo que...
previsão que influencia as nossas ações no presente.
Sí, 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 sí. Por eso tal vez es la literatura la que siempre anuncia más, es el arte el que tiene mayor capacidad para ver otras opciones en ese
Sí.
sentido. Y siempre de alguna manera se adelanta a alguna de las posibilidades de transformación que generalmente no sabemos ver con la lógica con la que nosotros vivimos cotidianamente, digamos, ¿no? En términos de necesidad de buscar, digamos, los términos contrarios para entendernos, digamos. Pero es una lógica, digamos, también muy occidental, tal vez.
Isso também é outro tema que nos levaria em outras esferas, semiosferas.
Sí,
porque o tema da explosão é muito ocidental e completamente contra a estética japonesa e chinesa, por exemplo, onde
Exacto.
a repetição é mais estimada do que a inovação. Mas deixamos esse tema e volto para o seu plaidoyer para a arte. E eu acho que a última citação que trouxe do Lotman focaliza justamente nisso. A arte vai sobreviver, e ele pensa sobretudo na literatura, e se transformar. E essa transformação não pode ser prevista, mas a sobrevivência é uma previsão e uma antecipação.
Sí. Estamos de acuerdo. Muchísimas gracias a ambos. Gracias, porque veo que Irene me ha respondido en un chat. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Pampa.
Obrigado eu.
Thank you, Professor Nett. I'm a little worried about the time of the debate, so I would like to move on for the questions to Brian. I will start for the question made for Sylvia, from Sylvia. Sylvia asks, Brian, I was wondering if you can link your considerations about translation with Thorop's idea of total translation.
Yes, thank you. In fact, I'm translating Thorop's book now, and it definitely deserves translation. I think it's a quite interesting synthesis of Eastern European, Western European thought on translation, as well as semiotic thinking. So yeah, there's something deeply semiotic about Thorop's approach to translation. Yeah, I haven't thought about exactly how to connect it to Lotman. In a sense, Thorop makes demetaphorises Lotman's discussion about translation, which is often metaphorical, right? Translation as a cultural process, as this communication between non-equivalent codes. It could be non-equivalent media, so it's quite productive. And so Lotman, in a sense, applies that directly to translation. But I would also mention, just in terms of this notion about Lotman's statement that history is always with us, I'm not sure that suggests that culture is not unpredictable, because he mentions that the workings of the cultural reservoir, we never know what's going to rise to the surface as suddenly relevant, what will sink into obscurity, how the cultural reservoir will be deployed, interpreted in any given moment. I'm always thinking about that recently in current debates in the United States, where everyone is, referencing the founding fathers, but in ways that I never would have predicted. I mean, there's nothing predictable about this, what gets selected from the reservoir at any moment in time, and then how it's interpreted or re-semanticized. So I do think the notion that history is always with it doesn't necessarily mean that culture, in my opinion, is predictable. I do think Mikhail Mikhailovich's talk yesterday about Lotman's notion of the binary structure of Russian society, I do think perhaps binary, he was suggesting there that those societies might be more predictable. It's a constant cycle of this upheaval and then this return to authoritarianism and so on. So it was a question I might have asked Mikhail Lotman yesterday about whether in that case, those societies might be less unpredictable than the tripartite societies he discusses. Yeah.
Thank you. More questions for Professor Baer by someone?
Well, I think I was addressed with this attempt at refuting my argument, but we are talking about different things, I think, because the history concerns the past, and the present of the past in the future is predicted by Lotman. Not the changes in relation to the past. That is another thing, but the presence of the past in the future is predicted, and an example of the predictability of the future, to which Lotman himself offers the argument.
Right, in the sense that it's an eternal feature of culture, right? This using of the past to referencing of the past. Yes, I see that. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, professors. Alexei has one question.
Yeah, just to that discussion, when he is writing the Culture and Explosion, the very initial message when he's writing about the explosions in culture is that if the culture is based, and he comes back to the previous taxonomy of these kind of binary cultures and tertiary cultures. So if we have the very rigid culture which exhibits the binary structures on its surface, for example, as he always compares the medieval culture or the 18th century Russia and 18th century Europe, for example, and implicitly Soviet Union, because it was not possible to talk about these things, but as a very rigid culture. So the explosions are much more unpredictable in these cultures than in the other cultures which exhibit this kind of, tertiary. And at that time he already kind of not so much abandons, but he just kind of forgets about this taxonomy of these binary cultures and tertiary cultures, because before, when he was writing in the 70s with Uspensky and so on, it was the very useful mechanism to describe this kind of differences between cultures, and essentially between the Russian culture and the European culture. Again, implicitly of the Soviet Union and the other European and countries. So I think that's the main kind of takeaway from the cultural explosion that we can take, that this kind of unpredictability is predetermined. A degree of unpredictability is predetermined by how much rigid this culture is, and that we can, of course, kind of measure maybe in some kind of ways which he offers in his analysis. So maybe that.
Thanks for the contribution. Let's say someone have more questions for Professor Nutt or Professor Baer. If you give me space, I would like to ask a question to Professor Baer, especially about the idea of Vinia. I'm very curiosity about the idea of Vinia is not so familiar to me personally, but I would like to know if Vinia could be an untranslatable approximation between Lotman and Eisenstein in art of different natures. And could Vinia be considering something close what Eisenstein defined by montage of attractions or something like that?
Yeah, this is a great question. Thank you. I applied it in my talk in a kind of way to understand the way Lotman and Eisenstein position themselves within Soviet society. As Alexei mentioned just now, the way you could talk about medieval Russia, but couldn't talk about the Soviet Union, but people might have understood. And so how, when you read their work today, you see how they undermined the official semiosis put forward by the Soviet state. And so I was thinking of Nia in that sense, in the way that Alexei Yurchak theorizes it as something that has long been ignored because historiography has, Cold War historiography has been so binary, right? Looking at dissident or this, but what about those other segments of society which somehow situate themselves on an outside but within, and and he looks at Komsomol groups that are both loyal Soviets at the same time they were pursuing these interests and things that led to the unmooring of the Soviet state. So I was looking at that, but as you say, it should be developed in relation to their own concepts, and I would connect it perhaps most in terms of this notion of liminality. Although liminality for the anthropologist was a temporary state, and both for Lotman and Eisenstein, if you think of it as ecstasy in Eisenstein's notion or explosion, it's temporary, right? Whereas the Vinia was a more structural component that could be inhabited within the state. So you didn't go in and out of Nia necessarily. But yes, that's something I need to explore in the relationship to how it would relate to their ideas of dynamic structures.
Thank you so much. Some more questions? Or we can do a break right now if you want.
Can I add just to that, Vinia?
Oh, of course.
If you're just because you were comparing, Brian, you were comparing Eisenstein and Lotman, and I think that they have very concrete methodological, devices that they develop from this concept of veneer. And I think for Lotman, the most important part of Eisenstein's montage, okay, maybe not most, but one of the most important things, was that the meaning is not in the shot itself; it's in between. It is not on screen, and that he repeats it in many ways, not only in the semiotics of cinema, but in other texts. That is very important, even for Tynyanov, because Tynyanov cites Eisenstein, and they cite each other, that the meaning is created exactly not in the first and the second shot, but in between them, in our mind. It's very kind of Persian idea, by the way. So, and the concept of minus device, extra textual relations in the text. Lotman says it in different texts, that the meaning of the text and not in the text itself. It is also, and sometimes even more, in the relation to those texts which are not present and to the things which are not present in the text. Mm-hmm. So sometimes when we are confronted with a historical text, it's most important to understand what is not said in the text than the actual information that we get from the text. So probably that will help.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I was trying to get that across and saying that while in his official published theoretical writings, he put forward this notion of pars pro toto, that somehow out of those separate shots, a meaning would emerge, and it could be the ideological meaning, etc. But in his memoiristic writings, he also suggests that no general meaning might emerge, or everyone might bring their own meaning to it. And so it's far more unstable, that relationship between the shots. But you're right. I mean, that moment in between, again, if it does resolve into one ideological meaning, okay, but in many cases it does not. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Brian and Alexei, for the contributions and the clarifications. It's very interesting theme. If you don't have another question or contribution, we can make a break to a coffee in 10 minutes, maybe?
5 or 10 minutes.
10 minutes. So we came here around 11 and 10. 11 and 10.
11.
11 is now.
11, 10. Okay.
Okay, 11 and 10, we stay together.
Okay.
So it's 11 and 10. Let's come back.
Everybody. Okay.
I am here. Let's continue.
Let's continue.
Let's go.
Let's go. So Irene and I are a little bit worried about the time, and we decided to move with the lecture for Sylvia, and finish the panel with his lecture, with a debate about the lecture for Sylvia, and finish the panel with this, if you agree. I think that's more comfortable to us today. Could be.
Okay, but remember that Sylvia has her time.
Yes, of course.
We're not. No. It's to preserve the time of Sylvia, and she has all the time she wants.
Yes, of course. So now we will have the lecture for Sylvia Barei. Sylvia is professor linked to Universidade Nacional de Córdoba in Argentina, and she's specialized and works in modern literature. Professor Sylvia will be lecturing the conference Juri Lotman, Borges, Imaginary Reader. That's okay. So Sylvia, feel free to start your presentation.
Thank you, Douglas. Thank you, Irene. And thank you for the invitation, and congratulations for this important Congress meeting. Okay, I'm sorry, but I will speak in Spanish. The name in Spanish, sorry, Alexei, you can practice your Spanish. The name is Juri Lotman, lector imaginario de Borges. Hemos puesto dos caricaturas como para acompañar esta lectura de un encuentro imaginario. Entiendo que este título parezca atrevido, y es mi deseo que se tome como una especie de juego ficcional en el que imagino que Lotman ha leído a Borges y puede fundamentar su vasta empresa intelectual citando el mundo literario del escritor argentino. Este coloquio ha sido denominado Semiótica de la Imprevisibilidad. Parece poco posible que Lotman y Borges se encontraron. Por ello he elegido el eje propuesto como encuentros culturales en fronteras espacio-temporales, porque en realidad lo que no es imprevisible es que los dos hubieran pensado los mecanismos de la cultura y el arte, cito, en sus procesos dinámicos de generación de nuevos sentidos, nuevos mensajes, nuevas informaciones, tal como dicen ustedes en la presentación de este seminario internacional. Intento hacer una lectura en contrapunto que vendría a conformar un modelo alternativo de interpretación. La emergencia de lo nuevo, de lo imprevisible a partir de la obra de Borges, produce nuevos modos de escribir y de leer al introducir una experiencia transformadora en la cultura argentina del siglo XX. Lo mismo sucede en el campo académico con la emergencia de un pensamiento innovador como el de Lotman. Juri Lotman y Jorge Luis Borges habitaron el mismo siglo, casi en los mismos años. Compartieron en lenguas diferentes las lecturas de los clásicos. Pensaron en la literatura como una aventura del lector y en el poliglotismo como propio de toda hibridación cultural, en la simetría y asimetría como funciones peculiares del cerebro que se replican en las culturas. Pensaron en los símbolos y los mitos, en el lenguaje como materialidad y como construcción de modelos del mundo, en los espejos y los textos dentro de los textos, en el sueño como ventana semiótica, en la cultura como memoria de la experiencia histórica pasada, en la pervivencia de las formas de la oralidad, en los movimientos dinámicos que introducen lo impredecible en el arte y en las sociedades, en la violencia como constitutiva de lo humano, en el miedo, en la vergüenza y en el coraje. Nunca se conocieron, dudo que alguna vez uno haya oído hablar del otro. Vivieron en dos extremos del mundo, aunque Borges admiraba el mundo nórdico y Lotman vino en dos oportunidades a América Latina. Coincidieron, sin embargo, en vivir en dos orillas del mundo, en dos fronteras. Lotman, cuyo oficio era principalmente el de enseñar, habló de Dostoyevsky, de Tolstoy, de Mikhail Bulgakov, de Proust, de Mayakovsky, de Cervantes y Shakespeare, de Lermontov y de la poesía de Alexander Pushkin, sobre todo de Pushkin. Borges habló de la Odisea, del padre Brown, de Faulkner, de Romeo y Julieta y del Moro de Venecia, de Platón y Aristóteles, de Cervantes, Don Quijote y un imaginario Pierre Menard, de Evaristo Carriego, de Snorri Sturluson y de Kafka, sobre todo de Kafka. Tal vez con una misma idea, situados históricamente todos ellos, se expresan en algún lenguaje, muchas veces extemporáneo, un sistema de modelización, le llamaba Lotman. Todos hablan con todos, lo que llamamos poliglotismo cultural, y todos significan, es decir, construyen sentido. En la presentación de Universe of Mind, Umberto Eco afirma que Lotman, ahí está la cita, la puedo repetir en español, en el transcurso de su carrera intelectual, Juri Lotman aplicó su mente a un amplio rango de disciplinas. Sus trabajos abarcan desde el análisis de fenómenos culturales como los blue jeans, las observaciones sobre demonología, las lecturas de textos poéticos y la consideración de los problemas de interpretación, hasta referencias en matemáticas y biología. El mismo Umberto Eco, en una entrevista que le hicieron estando en Buenos Aires, dice de Borges esta cita que han tenido en pantalla, no hace falta que la leo. Entonces, pongamos en común algunas lecturas y diálogos posibles. Yo imaginé para pensar este paper, a Lotman leyendo a Borges, y a un Borges que cree en el destino y no desecha la idea de que en un lejano norte del mundo, un ruso devenido estonio se está deleitando con su universo ficcional. El ruso está empeñado también en una tarea compleja que vincula humanidades, artes, ciencias sociales, matemáticas y cibernética. Y el mundo inventado por ese lejano escritor del sur es casi el modelo del mundo que él quiere describir. Quisiera entonces detenerme en algunas líneas fundamentales del edificio teórico lotmaniano e incorporar allí el diálogo posible con la literatura de Borges en un despliegue interesantísimo de posibilidades de reflexión. En ello se lee claramente de qué manera un sistema complejo es siempre un sistema multicentrado y heterogéneo. Señalaré 7 aspectos comunes, dejaré de lado otros muchos en los que coincidieron. No hablaré de los simulacros, los espejos, la historia, el otro, la muerte, la violencia, los nombres, las sombras, las mitologías, los héroes, las versiones apócrifas, las formas de traducción. Empiezo con la noción de semiosfera y complejidad cultural. Siendo uno investigador y otro creador de ficciones, tuvieron una profunda certeza acerca de la complejidad de las culturas humanas. Lotman desarrolló una teoría cuya preocupación nuclear es buscar en el dinamismo de las culturas una explicación para su complejidad y sus cambios, sus explosiones, sus transformaciones profundas. El otro ideó ficciones que trataron de dar respuesta a esta pregunta por la complejidad, pensando en laberintos, en jardines que se multiplican, en sujetos que viven al mismo tiempo dos situaciones y dos culturas, en los espacios, en el fluir del tiempo que se vuelve reversible. Ahí está la cita de Lotman: la semiosfera promueve complejos diálogos entre niveles, pero en la unidad de un espacio semiótico, el hecho de una frontera solo divide el espacio interno del externo. Ahí tomo para ejemplificar un cuento cortito de Borges que se llama El cautivo, y que seguramente los lectores de Borges conocen, en la que él imagina que un niño ha sido robado por los indios y que los padres lo buscan y en algún momento encuentran un indio de cabellos rubios que ya no podía hablar su lengua natal, pero lo llevan a su casa y el chico reconoce un lugar donde había escondido cuando era pequeño un cuchillito. Lo que pasa es que después el niño, que está acostumbrado a la semiosfera indígena, se escapa, se va, dice el cuento, que no reconoce ni la casa, ni siquiera como un perro, ni la casa ni los padres, y se vuelve al desierto. Entonces, fuera de la semiosfera no puede haber ni comunicación ni lenguaje, nos dice Lotman. Fuera de su semiosfera, anclada en el espacio del desierto, que sería el lugar del otro, el niño creado como indio, es decir, en una semiosfera distinta, no puede volver a comunicarte, ya no conoce los lenguajes de la cultura que lo vio nacer. El segundo aspecto que pongo en común es el lenguaje como sistema modelizante. La idea de que el lenguaje construye el mundo está propuesta inicialmente por Lotman en su libro La estructura del texto artístico, la fecunda división entre sistemas modelizantes de primero y de segundo grado. Ahí está la cita, imagino que no hace falta que la traduzca, queda en la pantalla, así no demoro. Y la cita de Borges que señala, si el lenguaje es representación, la escritura es la eficacia con que el lenguaje funciona en la expresión de una intuición o una idea. Esto está sacado de un reportaje también. Para Borges, el lenguaje es una trama que organiza el mundo. El hombre está cincelado por el lenguaje, imagina, sueña, cree y crea porque dispone del lenguaje. Si careciéramos de una palabra articulada, el mundo humano sería inexistente, aunque entre nombre y realidad existe un hiato insalvable. El tercer aspecto es el de la memoria cultural. Lotman dice, uno podría esperar que un texto que vive a través de los siglos se desvanezca y pierda la información contenida en él. Sin embargo, los textos preservan su actividad cultural, revelan capacidad para anular información, es decir, capacidad de memoria, etc. Ahí quisiera señalar esta cita de Irene Machado, que dice entre lo dicho y lo no dicho, lo visible y lo invisible, transita la memoria, etc. No lo cito todo, es parte de un trabajo que está publicado en la compilación que hicimos con Ariel Gómez Ponce, de este año, en homenaje a Lotman, que se llama Lotman Revisitado. En relación con la memoria, que es central en Borges, y a él le preocupa cómo se suturan las grietas del olvido. Entonces él dice, la memoria es el nombre que damos a las grietas del obstinado olvido. Tal vez los que han leído a Borges o lo conocen bien, recuerden su famoso cuento Funes el Memorioso. Porque más allá de lo que cada uno puede recordar, Funes lo recuerda todo. Es una especie de monstruo humano. Lo que se pregunta Borges es cómo interpretar el pasado, cómo recuperar la memoria, cómo sostener la memoria familiar y al mismo tiempo la memoria de la patria, que en el caso de su literatura es la memoria de sus abuelos, de sus ancestros. Para ambos, los estudios de memoria se concentran en las negociaciones dinámicas de significado que se dan en y a través de la cultura, en las formas en que esos significados se entrelazan con la historia, y en las batallas políticas que determinan quién define el pasado, cómo, con qué objetivos, qué es lo que debe ser borrado, es decir, olvidado. Eso como una operación no individual, sino cultural. El cuarto aspecto, el texto en el texto, este es un concepto lotmaniano ligado justamente a la memoria cultural y a la idea de intertextualidad. En términos de Lotman, el poliglotismo de las culturas contribuye a su dinamismo y transformación. Y acá está la cita que también citara el profesor Nos, o sea que no la voy a traducir, ya la hemos leído antes, donde está la idea de que el texto es una especie de de grano, de semilla, que contiene en sí los futuros desarrollos, ya que estuvieron hablando mucho de pasado y de futuro, ¿no? Sobre todo la idea de que siempre el texto cambia según las interpretaciones. Borges piensa que la literatura es más que la suma de nombres prestigiosos, en una larga cadena de textos ligados más allá del tiempo. Por esta razón, hay un libro de arena, uno de sus libros se llama El libro de arena, cuyas páginas son infinitas, y también alguien como un personaje que él inventa, que se llama Pierre Menard, puede reescribir el Quijote como si fuera un texto nuevo. Los libros que yo leí, ahí está la cita que tienen en pantalla, pienso que habrán de incorporarse, como la fórmula de Teseo o lo de Ahasverus, a la memoria general de la especie, y que se multiplicarán en su ámbito, más allá de los términos de la gloria de quien los escribió, más allá de la muerte del idioma en que fueran escritos. Cuando él comienza a estudiar el antiguo lenguaje anglosajón, el lenguaje de hierro le llaman, el lenguaje que usaban mis mayores, él escribe, cito un pequeño poema: alabada sea la infinita urdimbre de los efectos y las causas, que antes de mostrarme el espejo en que no veré a nadie o veré a otro, me concede esta pura contemplación de un lenguaje del alma. Esa idea tan lotmaniana de que el dinamismo de las culturas nos permite traer y reescribir textos del pasado, lenguajes del pasado. Otro aspecto que he puesto en comparación es el del mundo asimétrico de la lectura. Lotman piensa que la relación entre escritores y lectores, texto y audiencia, es siempre asimétrica. Y entonces él señala, ahí está una frase en inglés de Universe of Mind, que dice: un lector tiene su propia personalidad, su propia memoria cultural, códigos y asociaciones para incidir en el texto. Nunca son idénticos a los del autor. Entre texto y lector, audiencia, pone entre paréntesis, hay dos tipos de relaciones contrapuestas. Sin embargo, esto deriva en una de las hipótesis más contundentes de Lotman. El texto necesita, para ser puesto en acción, de un interlocutor. En esto se pone de manifiesto la naturaleza profundamente dialógica de la conciencia como tal, esa relación que él hace entre el texto como una conciencia dialógica. El encuentro con su destinatario, el choque con otra textualidad, la inmersión en un medio semiótico, en todos los casos, se trata de la intromisión de otra conciencia, como si fuera un elemento ajeno, de una semiosis extraña, eso como cita, que como reacción catalítica conduce el texto a un estado de excitación. Al mismo tiempo que, siendo el mismo, se vuelve otro, dice Lotman. En estos términos, el extrañamiento parece asumir un papel altamente creativo, deviniendo un poderoso mecanismo de arranque semiótico, incluso indispensable para activar cualquier proceso de lectura. Nunca mejor un poema de Borges para que en la conciencia del escritor, de los personajes y de los lectores devienen al mismo tiempo uno y otro. Una especie de cinta de Moebius que los vincula y los diferencia. He elegido un poema cortito que se llama Sueña Alonso Quijano. El hombre se despierta de un incierto sueño de alfanjes y de campo llano y se toca la barba con la mano y se pregunta si está herido o muerto. ¿No lo perseguirán los hechiceros que han jurado su mal bajo la luna? Nada, apenas el frío, apenas una dolencia de sus años postrimeros. El hidalgo fue un sueño de Cervantes y Don Quijote un sueño del hidalgo. El doble sueño los confunde y algo está pasando que pasó mucho antes. Quijano duerme y sueña. Una batalla. Los mares del espanto y la metralla. El punto 6, ciudad y mito. Ambos pensaron un mundo imaginario en la fundación de las dos ciudades que los vieron nacer, con una diferencia. El mundo de Lotman es básicamente topológico, el de Borges se centra en la preocupación por el tiempo. Lotman recurre al mito de la fundación de San Petersburgo para explicar textos disímiles y asimétricos que sin embargo dan luz a la historia inicial. Él dice, esta cita está en inglés, la ciudad es un mecanismo semiótico complejo, un generador cultural, pero cumple esta función solo porque es un crisol de textos y códigos pertenecientes a todo tipo de lenguajes y niveles. El poliglotismo semiótico esencial de cada ciudad es lo que vuelve tan productivos los encuentros semióticos, etc. Borges también recurre al mito para hablar de la ciudad que lo vio nacer, y más específicamente con su fundación que él inventa, que ocurrió en el barrio de su infancia, que es el barrio de Palermo. El poema es largo, no lo voy a leer, ahí está escrito un pedacito, que no alcanza a ser ni siquiera la mitad, y sí, en cambio voy a leer un poema cortito que se llama El Arrabal, que es de su primera época, cuando él dice, hablando de Buenos Aires, ¿no? Esta ciudad que yo creí mi pasado es mi porvenir, mi presente. Los años que he vivido en Europa son ilusorios. Yo estaba siempre y estaré en Buenos Aires. Otro punto es el mundo de los sueños. Para Lotman, el sueño no es lo inconsciente, sino otra conciencia. El sueño se desarrolla bajo el aspecto de una compleja y contradictoria trama semiótica, dice en El sueño ventana semiótica, definiéndolo como un medio de comunicación excepcionalmente frágil y plurisignificante. Tiene como función, cito, ser la reserva de la indeterminación semiótica, el espacio que queda todavía para colmarlo de sentidos, cultura y explosión, ¿no es cierto? Por lo tanto, el sueño está rodeado de posibilidades que hacen de él un modo polisemántico extremo de guardar información. Lotman considera posible asignar al sueño una función cultural especial, devenir la reserva de la incertidumbre semiótica, un lugar que debe ser completado en sus sentidos. En Borges, el mundo de los sueños es un espacio paralelo en que las cosas que nos suceden son tan ilusorias como aquella de la vida diaria en que la gente cree estar despierta. El sueño depara verdades, envía información que podemos procesar, diría Lotman. Podemos procesar de manera unívoca o polisemántica, que es la que siempre más nos interesa. ¿Quién serás esta noche en el oscuro sueño del otro lado de su muro? Se pregunta Borges. Hay un cuento que no me voy a detener porque sé que se detiene Pampa en su presentación, que se llama El Sur, en el que un hombre sufre un accidente y alucina, sueña que va a morir a cielo abierto en una pelea con gauchos de otra época. Entonces el narrador dice, a la realidad le gustan las simetrías y los leves anacronismos. Dice esto justamente porque Lotman lo que sueña se va a hacer realidad después en un duelo absurdo en la llanura abierta, hablando de esta cosa de predecir el futuro, ¿no? Entonces el narrador cuenta que el personaje sintió, acá citó a Borges, que si él hubiera podido elegir o soñar su muerte, esta era la muerte que hubiera elegido o soñado. Lotman empuja con firmeza el cuchillo, que acaso no sabrá manejar, es un facón, y sale a la llanura a morir justamente a cielo abierto. Se supone, porque ahí queda el cuento con el final abierto. Para finalizar, desde una mirada que he señalado como coincidente y divergente, bueno, la parte de lo divergente no la leí para no ocupar tanto tiempo, lo señalo al principio, una mirada que es simétrica y asimétrica al mismo tiempo, encuentro en ellos una profunda preocupación por lo humano. un ensayo de Lotman que a mí me gusta mucho, que se titula La caña pensante, comienza diciendo así: el problema de la cultura no puede ser resuelto sin una definición sobre su posición en el espacio extracultural. La cuestión puede ser formulada de este modo: la peculiaridad del hombre como ser cultural necesita de su contraposición con el mundo de la naturaleza. Con determinados aspectos de su ser, el hombre pertenece a la cultura, con otros, en cambio, se liga al mundo extracultural. Del mismo modo, sería poco prudente excluir categóricamente el mundo animal de la esfera de la cultura. Esta última parte nosotros sabemos que es bien interesante porque va a producir los diálogos posteriores, sobre todo con Caleb y Kuhl, y va a abrir a las discusiones acerca de una biosemiótica. Yo lo pongo como cita acá en relación de el hombre, la cultura y el mundo extracultural. Para cerrar, cito una frase de Borges que a él le gustaba repetir, que es una frase de Chesterton y que yo imagino que a Lotman le hubiera gustado seguramente. Voy a envejecer para todo, para el amor, para la mentira, pero nunca envejeceré para el asombro. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Silvia. Congratulations, thank you so much. We have Brian and Alexei with the hands who would like to
No,
start?
that was an applause. That was,
sorry.
that's another hand. But I can just ask right away if you want.
Did you practice your Spanish, Alexei?
Yes, thank you very much. It's very passive now, but I will continue in English. But I was just thinking immediately when you compared Lotman and Borges, the motive of the mirror. He speaks, Lotman writes about that on different occasions, especially in the universe of the mind, and he likes to analyze the las meninas and so on. And I made this, I don't remember from my memory any citations from Borges, but I thought that the image of a mirror is very important for him as well. So maybe you could comment on that or just...
Yes. Can I answer in Spanish? Okay. Como el trabajo era demasiado largo, was too long, hay algunos aspectos que yo dejé de lado. El del espejo es muy interesante. Hablo lento como para que puedas comprender bien mi español. Que no es el de España al que tú estás acostumbrado. Claro que sí, es muy interesante en ambos. Es el tema de lo doble o de la duplicación, que en Lotman entiendo que es una perspectiva más positiva y más productiva en relación con las duplicaciones de la cultura. En el caso de Borges, que también advierte lo mismo, sin embargo, él tiene una visión como más pesimista o como más, como proyecta un miedo sobre la cuestión de los espejos, ¿no? Él entiende que el miedo, el espejo, nos duplica de una manera horrorosa, dice él, horrorosa. Que el miedo es como la cópula, dice en algún momento. Lo único que hace es duplicar y duplicar y duplicar. Entonces hay una visión distinta del espejo en tanto mecanismo cultural en Lotman y una especie de horror personal, así eso que se multiplica, es infinito, no sabremos nunca dónde termina. En Borges, tú no lo recuerdas, you don't remember, but it's really a very important topic, a metaphor, a very important metaphor.
Sí, sí, entiendo. Muchas gracias.
Okay, thank to you, Alexei.
We have another question to Silvia. E eu gostaria de perguntar... Irene?
No, can you ask first?
Vou perguntar em português, Silvia, que eu acho que fica mais fácil para a gente se entender. Pode ser?
No entendí, Douglas, sorry, Douglas, no se escuchó. ¿Me preguntaste algo? Perdón.
Sim, posso perguntar em português ou em inglês? O que você prefere?
No, sí, portugués, está bien, como quieras.
Tá bom. Bom, primeiro elogiar o caminho criativo, né, que você e experimental até que você adotou, né, para estabelecer um diálogo entre o Borges e o Lotman, né? Eu acho que é uma metodologia muito diferente e muito interessante. E o que eu fiquei fascinado com a sua apresentação é a questão do tempo, né? Do tempo da história, né? Como que isso está colocado na literatura do Borges e na própria literatura pós-moderna, né? Que acaba fazendo com que Borges e Lotman sejam quase contemporâneos para pensar em questões que estão sendo debatidas no mundo, né? Lotman pela perspectiva da semiótica e Borges e outros autores pós-modernos pela perspectiva da literatura, né? E eu gostaria que você comentasse sobre essa questão de como a memória e a história, né, se fazem presentes aí tanto no aspecto literário de Borges e dos pós-modernos, né, da literatura pós-moderna, e na semiótica de Lotman.
A ver, varias cuestiones en lo que señalaste, varias cuestiones. Bueno, lo primero es agradecer tu valoración de la comparación que yo hago, porque en realidad digamos, es un texto que se puede llamar ficcional, este que he presentado, ¿no es cierto? Imaginario, pero vienen a coincidir en un momento del siglo XX. Los dos atraviesan casi todo el siglo XX, ¿no es cierto? Uno muere en el 86 y el otro en el 93, o sea, hay aspectos de la biografía que yo he salteado para que no fuera tan largo el trabajo, y vienen a coincidir en una especie de lectura común de los problemas de ese siglo, ¿no? Y hacerte las mismas preguntas. Por eso, en algún momento, cuando ustedes me invitaron, me saltó como propuesta, ¿no? Hay una especie de momento histórico en el que ambos coinciden y cuyas lecturas también coinciden, aunque, también lo digo en una parte del trabajo, uno es un materialista, Lotman, y Borges trabaja con un universo, con principios filosóficos que son idealistas. Eso como primera aclaración. Sin embargo, yo creo que ambos son fundamentalmente modernos, son hombres del siglo XX. Se lo pone a Lotman a veces, a Borges como postmoderno, pero en realidad no lo es. ¿Qué es lo que hace Borges en ese universo imaginario? Anticipa un poco esto en función de lo que estaban discutiendo previamente con Pampa, con Baer, con Noss, acerca de la anticipación de un futuro que todavía no es, que puede llegar a ser, y que pareciera paradójico, pero es un futuro que está anclado en la memoria. Y eso yo lo advierto como un elemento común que no he desarrollado, por supuesto, porque no se puede desarrollar todo, pero ahora ustedes con las preguntas de algún modo me invitan a seguir el trabajo. Yo había visualizado eso, pero no lo he desarrollado. Porque el tema de la memoria es central en los dos, porque se trata de una memoria que se despega de la historia y que es una memoria creativa. Es una lectura del pasado, una lectura de la historia, pero que en algún sentido uno podría decir que es complementaria. dice aquello que la historia, con mayúsculas, digamos, en todo caso hasta como ciencia, no puede o no dice o no puede especular porque le faltan los rastros, le faltan los documentos, los monumentos y los documentos, ¿no es cierto? Cómo se construye la historia. En cambio, la ciencia puede especular con que la memoria reconstruye de una determinada manera, en el caso de Lotman, y la literatura, claro que lo puede hacer. Borges lo hace a partir de sus antepasados, a partir de la construcción de la historia argentina, pero después se vuelve hacia la historia del mundo, ¿no es cierto? La historia de la antigua Europa, que a él le interesa mucho. Entonces me parece que uno ahí los puede poner en contacto, siendo que el punto de partida es diferente, y el punto de llegada, que es el que nosotros estamos leyendo, porque está en su obra, hay que volverse a las no memorias, a las no memoirs de Lotman, para ver hasta qué punto esa lectura del siglo XX, de la Segunda Guerra Mundial, de la posguerra, etcétera, coinciden en dos universos literarios diferentes, uno más fantástico, digamos, más ficcional, y el otro científico, pero que yo encuentro muchas veces que se abre hacia una especulación ficcional. Muy interesante tu pregunta, muchas gracias. Te respondo esto medio como por arriba, pero te debo la otra parte de la investigación.
Muito obrigado, Silvia. Is
Gracias
there
a ti.
another question? Pampa levantó a mão.
Sí, gracias, Douglas. Silvia, tengo una preocupación porque vos aludiste tanto siempre a que todo lo que los reúne en ciertas afinidades de pensamiento, pero también a aquello que los separa básicamente en cuanto a construcción filosófica. Y pensando justamente en la convocatoria de este encuentro, mi pregunta, más que pregunta para reflexionar en diálogo contigo, en realidad la lógica de la biblioteca de Borges es totalmente diferente a la lógica de la semiosfera de Lotman en cuanto a la cuestión de, bueno, o por ejemplo de la imprevisibilidad o de la posibilidad de la explosión como caos, digamos, como transformación total, al menos en algunas zonas, porque pensándolo a Borges en el sentido de que todo ya ha sido escrito, ¿no? Un poco, y que cada cosa que se escribe repite una escena o vuelve a la recurrencia de algo que ya se dijo, solo que en otros términos. Entonces me preguntaba si podría buscarse en esa lógica hecha de laberintos, de sueños, de espejos, etcétera, como vos bien definiste, algo que recuerde la dinámica de la semiosfera lotmaniana, que vos recién justamente estabas diciendo, pero eso me pasa a mí también con Bakhtin, etcétera. Por momentos las teorías filosóficas y culturales tienen un algo de ficción en el mejor sentido, es decir, de simulacro del objeto que están pensando, ¿no? En ese sentido, ficción, como un simulador de, digamos, como si. Entonces, yo no sé si efectivamente están tan en las antípodas en esas lógicas.
Claro, para los que están en el grupo en este momento escuchando, que considero a Pampa mi maestra. y que cada vez que me pregunta me pone en un aprieto, porque siempre me observa algo que yo no he alcanzado a ver o no he alcanzado a decir. Eso como primera aclaración. Gracias, Pampa, por la observación, porque yo simplemente pienso igual que vos, ¿eh? No tomé especialmente la figura de la biblioteca, pero pienso que tomando la figura de la biblioteca en Borges, o a partir de Borges, yo en realidad mi lectura la hice al revés, a partir de Lotman, entendiendo que es el eje de discusión del Congreso, ¿no es cierto?
Claro.
Y me bajé, ¿no es cierto?, de Lotman, me bajé a el universo borgiano. Pero si uno partiera al revés, me parece que además perfectamente posible la lectura inversa, la lógica de la biblioteca también es la lógica de la semiosfera, porque condensa una serie de elementos que son parte o el modo en que Lotman define a la semiosfera. Convengamos, coincido con vos en que hay ahí una creación intelectual que trata de mantenerse dentro del campo de las ciencias humanas, obviamente, ¿no es cierto?, con los aportes que le vienen de otras ciencias o de otros espacios, pero que pueden leerse como importantes metáforas en relación con la descripción de las culturas. Y esta metáfora de Borges de la biblioteca, aquello infinito, aquello que nos viene del pasado pero que se proyecta al futuro, aquello que se define como una multiplicidad de textos y de discursos que se entrelazan, que se responden entre sí, que crean sus propios precursores, esta idea de Borges de que uno lee creando sus propios precursores, y la idea de Lotman de cómo se lee el pasado, qué aspectos del pasado lee nuestra memoria, me parece que sí, que es una observación bien pertinente tuya y bien interesante para trabajarlo, siendo que sobre el tema de la biblioteca en Borges hay escrito no sé cuántos tomos, Pampa, uno podría revisar eso, y hay escrito muchísimo desde el punto de vista de la crítica, pero no conozco a nadie que haya puesto en relación estos aspectos que vos estás señalando.
Sí, gracias, Silvia. No, discúlpame, pero no era una observación la mía, ¿eh? Era básicamente para nada, era simplemente que uno en realidad responde a sus propias obsesiones, esa es la verdad cuando hace preguntas, ¿no? Más que a pensar en lo que el otro puede estar pensando, en qué frecuencia de onda. El tema es que me ronda esta idea cada vez más de la ficcionalidad de las teorías.
Bien interesante.
Este punto para mí constituye en este momento un problema, por eso pido disculpas, porque uno saca sus propias fantasmas y los traslada a la mesa de discusión y no son necesariamente los del otro, ¿no? Pero cada vez más preocupada por las epistemes científicas de las ciencias humanas, sobre todo más que las sociales, que son más positivistas, veo estas afinidades por el lado de que de alguna manera las teorías son unos simuladores perfectos, cuasi ficcionales en el mejor de los sentidos en que yo entiendo la ficción. Era simplemente eso, ¿no? De ver de qué manera y lo mismo que hace, bueno, Bakhtin con el cronotopo, por ejemplo, ¿no es cierto? Entonces es trasladar de otros campos, pero metaforizarlo de alguna manera después, tratando de ver en esa modelo la modelización que ellos tienen en mente del funcionamiento del objeto de estudio que tienen en su foco, ¿no? Así que gracias, y para nada.
No,
y para nada soy tu maestra porque no soy tan viejita.
Pero yo no digo maestra en el sentido de la edad.
No, es una broma, gracias, gracias.
Se me ocurría, Pampa, cuando vos hablabas que sí, que suponete, esta comparación imaginaria que yo he hecho también podría hacerse con Bakhtin. Yo no soy tan conocedora del mundo Bakhtin como vos, pero Borges y Bakhtin, B y B, uno los podría poner en relación.
Sí, tal cual, tal cual. Bueno, gracias a todos, gracias.
Muito obrigado. Muito interessante a gente poder pensar as ficcionalidades das teorias. Muito bom.
Sim, muito interessante.
Alguém mais? Someone?
Eu. I would like to talk because it's impossible not to discuss, not to refer to these relations. Because when we thought about this round table, this approximation, this relation between Peirce and Lotman, Borges and Lotman, Eisenstein and Lotman, and Tinianov, as Semenenko told us yesterday and today. I think that we are inside this universe of the mind. Because for me, this relation between Eisenstein and Lotman is incredible in one point, because we have two different universes in terms of ideological ideas. Because Eisenstein, I think that his conduction or his understanding of the world is necessarily dialectic. I think even when he is talking about pathos, the pathos of compositional pathos, he is talking about dialectics. But Lotman, no. But Lotman is not that is not the position of Lotman. And for me, this anti-materialistic conception of Lotman is more related to the dialogical perspective of Bakhtin, because for Bakhtin, dialogic and dialogue are not the same relation. Yeah? Dialogic universe is not dialectic, how he taught for us. Now, I would like to ask you, Sylvia, about this relation of topological, when you refers to the city, and you said that Lotman has a topological vision of the city, and Borges, no, Borges is more related to the dreams or the imaginary. When Lotman refers to Pushkin, for example, the Petersburg of Pushkin, he's talking about this city, but in some studies, he refers to an imaginary city, because Petersburg, in some circumstances, is a city of imaginary people, of fantastic people, fantastic in the sense of the fiction. So I'd like to understand your relation, or what you think about this relation, topologic and imaginary, or topologia e o imaginário. And I would like to say that when you thought about this conference, we never could imagine that we were living the fiction, the politics as a fiction, as we are living today. Pampa said about the fictionalization of the theory, but here in Brazil, but I think that in other parts of the world, we are living a fictionalization of the politics. The politics is completely fiction, universe of fiction nowadays. So it's a commentary only because you talked about the fictionalization of the theory, and we are living this fictionalization of the politics. Thank you.
La última parte de tu intervención me lleva a lo que está sucediendo en este preciso momento, y es que podemos estar conectados por el mundo de las imágenes, ¿no es cierto? Entonces, ¿hasta qué punto nuestra propia realidad se desrealiza? Y sin embargo, es nuestra realidad en el siglo XXI, ¿no? No digo más nada de eso porque me saca del tema de Lotman y Borges que preguntaste al principio, pero me parece fundamental preguntárselo en relación no solo con la política, sino con todas las formas de construcción o a las que pertenecemos en este momento del siglo XXI. Yo lo que dije, Irene, es que el mundo de Lotman es básicamente topológico, la descripción que él hace, sobre todo al principio, porque al final, y está muy bien en las discusiones que hemos tenido, se vuelve hacia la cuestión de la historia. En cambio, el mundo de Borges, no dije que estuviera centrado en la memoria, sino que estaba centrado en la cuestión del tiempo, que mientras uno era fundamentalmente espacial, el otro es fundamentalmente temporal. Pero ni uno solo es solo espacial, ni uno solo es solo temporal, sino que justamente se articulan en esta cuestión del espacio-tiempo que define a las culturas. Y ambos coinciden, en eso sí te doy la razón, y me parece que tengo que trabajarlo mejor, ambos coinciden en la reflexión y la ficcionalización que hacen de sus propias ciudades en el mundo del mito. Ambos se vuelven no solo hacia la literatura que habla de estas ciudades, sino que se vuelven hacia lo que Borges llama una fundación mítica de las ciudades. Hay un origen que está más allá del origen, que está tachado, que es y no se puede reconstruir, y que por lo tanto ambos apelan a la cuestión mítica. Hay un imaginario en la construcción de la ciudad que se proyecta hacia el futuro. Por eso Lotman lo proyecta hacia el San Petersburgo contemporáneo, o del siglo XIX, del siglo XX, y Borges lo proyecta hacia un barrio en la ciudad de Buenos Aires, donde él dice que se creó la ciudad, cosa que es un invento de él, ¿no es cierto? A mí me parece que este diálogo, por volver a lo de dialéctico y dialógico, coincido totalmente con vos, que ambos universos son dialógicos, este diálogo entre ciudad, mito, memoria y literatura puede rastrearse de una manera bien interesante en los dos, ¿no? En los dos, viendo posiblemente detalles de cómo construyen cada uno de los aspectos en sus coincidencias y en sus diferencias, que es lo que yo diferencias no me he detenido, ¿no? Diferencias es otro paper, no hay vuelta que darle.
Gracias, muchas gracias.
Gracias, Irene.
Thank you so much. Someone else has questions to Professor Silvia? No. Well, if everybody is satisfied with the discussion, we can go to the end of the panel, maybe. Are you agree?
Yeah, yes.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
I'm tired.
And we're hungry.
Yes.
I have a break. My brain
Me hungry.
Finishing the table. finish the panel, thanks again to Professor Brian, Winfried, and Sylvia for brilliant expositions. It was a great pleasure to hear you, and we can invite everybody to our next session that will be in the 12, not 12, is
No, 2 p.m.
2 p.m.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
tomorrow in the morning and in the afternoon too. So thanks again. Thank you so much. It will be a pleasure. It will be a pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.